The rain had just begun to fall when Daniel stepped out of his car and looked at the towering ruins of Blackwood Asylum. The building loomed against the dark sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring back at him. He had read about this place for years. Rumors of strange experiments, tortured patients, and the whispers of those who claimed to have heard voices inside long after the asylum was abandoned. Tonight he would finally see it for himself. The gates screeched as he pushed them open. Weeds grew tall between the cracks of the stone path, and the air smelled of rust and mold. Each step closer to the asylum felt heavier, as if something in the ground resisted his arrival. He told himself it was only nerves, but deep down, he knew the stories were not just legends. Inside, the silence was suffocating. The long corridor stretched into darkness, lined with peeling paint and rusted gurneys. His flashlight beam flickered across graffiti on the walls. Names, dates, symbols he did not understand. The deeper he walked, the colder the air became, until his breath was visible like smoke. A sudden noise echoed, a faint tap, like footsteps, coming from above. He froze, holding the light still. "Hello." His voice cracked against the silence. No answer. Only the drip of water leaking through the ceiling. He laughed nervously, convincing himself it was just the building settling. He turned into a patient ward. The rows of iron beds were still there, their mattresses eaten by time and rats. On one of the walls, someone had scrawled in red, paint, or perhaps something darker. They never left. Daniel ran his fingers over the words, his skin prickling. He remembered the rumors. Patients locked in here during a fire. Some never rescued, their screams echoing in the halls even decades later. As he explored further, his light fell on a door at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, this one was untouched, its surface unbroken, its handle clean as if someone had polished it recently. He felt a pull, a strange urge to open it, though his instincts screamed not to. With trembling fingers, he pushed it open. Behind the door was a stairwell leading down into complete darkness. The air that rose up from below was colder than ice, thick with the stench of decay. Daniel swallowed hard. He had come here for answers, and answers always waited in the dark. He stepped onto the first stair. As the door shut behind him, the sound echoed like a coffin lid closing. Daniel pushed open the heavy wooden door, its rusted hinges crying out as if warning him to turn back. The room he entered was once an operating theater, now drowned in darkness except for the pale light of his flickering flashlight. The air smelled of burnt chemicals and something older, rotten, almost metallic. On the tiled floor, beneath layers of dust, he noticed fresh stains, dark red, glistening as though the blood had only just spilled. His heartbeat quickened. He stepped closer, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. In the corner stood a broken operating chair, its leather straps still intact, stiffened with age. As Daniel's eyes adjusted, he realized the straps were stained, hardened with old blood. He reached out almost against his will, and the moment his fingers brushed the surface, the room came alive with sound. Screams! Agonizing, endless screams filled his ears. They didn't come from his imagination. They echoed through the walls, vibrating the air. He dropped the flashlight, the beam rolling across the floor and illuminating. Something else. Surgical tools laid, neatly on a tray. Scalpels, rusted scissors, a bone saw. They were polished, as if someone still used them. Daniel staggered backward, his breath short, when a shadow crossed the beam of light. It was tall, faceless, and moved unnaturally, as if it had no bones. It glided silently, yet the sound of footsteps filled the room. More shadows appeared in the doorway, figures of patients, their faces blurred, their mouths open in silent screams. Their bodies twitched as though strings pulled them. The flashlight flickered violently, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Daniel froze. From the far corner, a whisper slithered through the air. "We never left." The temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the air. He ran for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. Behind him, the operating chair screeched as though dragged across the floor. Slowly it turned toward him, empty straps opening wide, waiting. And in the suffocating dark, Daniel realized he was not alone in that room. The faceless patients were closing in, step by step surrounding him, and the screams began again, louder, closer, deafening. Daniel's trembling hands fumbled with the handle of the locked door, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then, without warning, the screams cut off, silence so deep it felt heavier than sound. Slowly the lock clicked open on its own. The door creaked ajar, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into utter blackness. A chill crept up Daniel's spine. Something down there was calling him, not with words, but with a pull, a sick gravity that dragged his body forward. Even as his mind screamed to flee, he stepped onto the first stair. The wood groaned like a dying breath. Then another step. The air grew colder with each descent, the smell of damp stone and rot filling his lungs. By the time he reached the bottom, his flashlight flickered out. Darkness swallowed everything. Yet somehow Daniel could still see. Shapes moved in the shadows. Elongated arms, twisted necks, bodies crawling along the ceiling as if gravity meant nothing here. Their eyes glowed faintly, pale and empty, yet fixed directly on him. He could feel their hunger, their silent promises of pain. The hallway stretched endlessly, its walls breathing. Yes, breathing. Every exhale carried faint whispers, overlapping voices that hissed his name. He pressed forward, heart hammering, until he stumbled upon a door carved into the stone. Symbols burned across its surface, writhing like living scars. His hand lifted on its own, fingers pressing against the cold wood. The whispers stopped. For a moment the world was utterly still. Then, bang! The door swung open, and a black void yawned before him. A shape stepped out, taller than any man, cloaked in shadow so deep it swallowed the faint light around it. No face, no form, just the weight of something ancient, wrong, and endless. Its voice wasn't a sound, but a vibration inside his skull. "You should not be here." Daniel staggered backward, but the ground beneath him split like wet paper. He fell, plummeting through the black, as dozens of pale hands reached from the void to grab at his body, pulling, tearing, dragging him deeper into the endless dark. The last thing he heard before the world collapsed into screams was the whisper of a child's voice, impossibly close to his ear. "We've been waiting for you." Daniel's body slammed against cold, wet stone. For a moment he couldn't breathe. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the basement stairs. He was in a vast corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The walls bled moisture, and the ceiling dripped black water that hissed like acid when it touched the floor. The air was thick, choking, carrying the stench of decay and burned flesh. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, slow and heavy, but its echo was wrong. It traveled backward, as if time itself was twisted. Daniel rose to his feet, his flashlight long gone. Yet again, the darkness had its own cruel way of showing him things. The corridor pulsed faintly, the walls flexing like muscle. Each time they expanded, he swore he heard muffled cries, buried deep within the stone, as if the asylum itself had swallowed its patients whole. Ahead, a door slammed open. He froze. From inside, a figure crawled out. No, not crawled. Twisted. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles. Its mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. It dragged itself forward, bones cracking with every movement. Eyes fixed on him. Behind it, more shadows stirred. Their shapes jagged, broken, but moving closer. Too many of them. He ran. His footsteps echoed endlessly. Yet no matter how far he went, the hallway never changed. Same doors, same dripping ceiling, same whispers that grew louder until they weren't whispers at all, but screams. They screamed his name over and over until his mind felt like it would split apart. Daniel stumbled into a room, slamming the door shut behind him. The sound stopped. Silence again. The room was an old patient ward, lined with rusted metal beds. On each bed lay a figure covered with a white sheet. Their chests did not rise. Their bodies were still. But as Daniel stepped closer, one sheet twitched. Then another. Then all of them. Slowly the figures beneath began to rise, their heads turning in unison toward him. He backed into a corner as dozens of eyeless faces turned his way. They opened their mouths, and from them came not screams, but a deep, guttural hum. The sound shook the floor, rattled the walls, made his teeth ache. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, as the sound grew into a deafening roar. The lights in the room flickered to life. For a single second, he saw their faces clearly. Stitched mouths, hollow sockets, skin stretched too tight across their skulls. And then the lights went out, plunging everything into blackness. In that blackness, something cold and wet touched his hand. Then another grabbed his ankle. Another wrapped around his throat. The figures were no longer across the room. They were everywhere. And above the chaos, that same child's voice whispered into his ear again, soft and almost sweet. "Don't fight! This is only the beginning." Daniel's vision swam in darkness. He thrashed against the hands clawing at him. But the harder he fought, the deeper they dragged him into the floor, as if the asylum itself was swallowing him whole. Just when his lungs burned for air, everything snapped. He was standing upright again, though the world around him was wrong. The hallway was there, but reversed, as if he were inside a giant mirror. The colors bled into each other. Walls rippled like liquid glass, and every reflection seemed delayed, like time was fractured. His own reflection appeared on the wall beside him, but it didn't move the way he did. It smiled when he didn't. It tilted its head slowly, watching him like prey. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The reflection answered in his voice, but warped, deeper, crawling with static. "You're in the place between, the place where the patients never left." The air was colder here, sharp enough to sting his lungs. He moved forward, and as he did, the reflections multiplied. Dozens of him walked beside him in the rippling glass, but each was slightly different. Some missing eyes, some bleeding, some grinning with jagged teeth. He tried not to look, but their whispers filled his ears. At the end of the mirrored corridor was a door, taller than the others, covered in old medical charts nailed into the wood. He tore one down and froze. It was his name, his birthday, his blood type, notes scrawled in red ink. Subject Natangra 13. Responds well to isolation. Symptoms: hallucinations, paranoia, violent nightmares. His hands shook. How could they have his file? He wasn't a patient here. He wasn't even born when this asylum shut down. The door creaked open on its own. Inside was a massive ward, but instead of beds, the room was filled with mirrors of every size. Some were cracked, some fogged, some stained with handprints that looked fresh. In the center of the room stood the child, the same one whose voice haunted him. But she wasn't a child anymore. Her form flickered, shifting between a little girl in a hospital gown and something else. Something tall, faceless, its fingers stretched like knives. "Why are you here?" Daniel demanded, his voice breaking. The child tilted her head, her hollow eyes glowing faintly. "Because you never left. You were always one of us. You just forgot." He stumbled back, shaking his head violently. "No, I'm alive. I don't belong here." But the mirrors around him began to show a truth he could not deny. Each reflection showed him strapped to a bed, electrodes in his skull, doctors writing notes as he screamed. In every reflection, he was not an intruder. He was the patient. He had always been the patient. The child's voice grew sharper, echoing from every mirror at once. "Do you remember now? They opened your skull. They carved out your mind. That's why you can't escape. This is your home." The mirrors rattled violently, glass cracking. Hands began to push out from within them, pale, trembling, some skeletal, some bloated. They reached for him, desperate to drag him into the glass. His reflection smiled again, blood trickling down its face, and whispered one final word with his own voice. "Stay." Daniel screamed as dozens of hands closed around him, pulling him toward the glass. He struggled, but his strength was nothing compared to theirs. The last thing he saw before being dragged into the mirror was the child's hollow face splitting into a monstrous grin. Daniel was dragged through the mirror like it was made of water, cold and suffocating. He tumbled onto the floor of a cavernous chamber that shouldn't exist beneath the asylum. The air was thick, heavy, like breathing in ash. The walls pulsed faintly, almost alive, veins of red light running through them as though the entire place had a heartbeat. He stood disoriented. This wasn't stone. It wasn't earth. The walls looked like stretched flesh, scarred and twitching. From the ceiling hung shapes that resembled beds, but the frames were twisted metal, and the mattresses writhed as if something unseen thrashed beneath them. In the center of the chamber stood a colossal figure, towering, faceless, its body shifting like smoke bound in human form. Dozens of voices whispered from it at once. Male, female, childlike, old, all blending into a chorus of pain. Daniel's knees nearly buckled under the sound. "You," Daniel whispered. "You're the one behind this." The entity's voice rumbled, shaking the marrow in his bones. "I am not behind. I am beneath. I am what they built upon. They thought they could cure madness here. But madness cannot be cured. It must be fed." As it spoke, Daniel saw images flashing in his mind. Doctors carving open skulls. Patients screaming as their reflections were stolen. Children locked in dark rooms. The asylum hadn't just been a hospital. It was a feeding ground. Every broken mind, every scream, every nightmare had been swallowed by this thing. And now, Daniel understood. The entity had been feeding on him too. "No!" Daniel muttered, clutching his head. "This isn't real. It can't be real." The whispers grew louder, crueler. "You lived here. You died here. You were mine long before you thought yourself free." The ground split beneath him, and skeletal hands burst through, Clawing at his legs, he tore free, stumbling toward the chamber's edge, but the walls themselves stretched, pushing him back. Every surface became a mirror, and in each reflection, he saw a version of himself more broken, more consumed. Some versions were strapped in straitjackets, others tore their own skin, others smiled with hollow eyes, whispering prayers to the thing in the dark. Daniel screamed, smashing one of the mirrors with his fist. But where glass should have shattered, the reflection bled. Thick black blood poured out, coating his hands, sticky and burning cold. The entity bent low, its massive shape blotting out what little light there was. Its faceless head hovered inches from him, and though it had no mouth, he felt its words inside his skull. Every story you've told yourself, every memory you cling to, they are lies. I wrote your past. I own your future. And when you wake, if you wake, you will still be mine. The floor quaked, the mirrors rippling violently. The child appeared again, flickering at the entity's side, her hollow eyes fixed on him. She whispered, "He can't be fought. He can only be remembered. If you forget what you saw here, you'll never leave. If you remember, you'll never sleep again." Daniel's chest tightened, his pulse pounding in his ears. He realized now, this wasn't just about escaping the asylum. The entity wanted him to choose madness or memory, stay forever in its aurasp, or return to the world above with the curse of knowing too much. And deep down he already knew there was no choice at all. Daniel's eyes darted around the chamber, desperate for a way out. The mirrors trembled like pools of black water, and for one fleeting moment, he saw something beyond them. Hallways, doors, the crumbling asylum above. A way back. Summoning what little strength he had, Daniel hurled himself toward the nearest mirror. The surface swallowed him whole, dragging his body through like tar. For a heartbeat, he was nowhere. Just endless, falling through black silence. Then suddenly, he crashed onto cold, cracked tiles. He was back in the asylum. Or at least, it looked like it. The long corridor stretched before him, paint peeling, lights buzzing faintly overhead. His breathing was ragged, his hands still sticky with the black blood that no amount of wiping could remove. For a moment, relief washed over him. But then he noticed the silence, too complete. The asylum had always groaned, whispered, shifted. Now it was dead still, as if holding its breath. Daniel staggered forward, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. He passed the therapy rooms, the broken beds, the empty wheelchairs. Everything was where it should be, yet wrong, subtly warped. Door handles pulsed like veins. Windows wept condensation, though it wasn't cold. As he rounded a corner, he froze. There he was, another Daniel, standing in the hallway ahead. Same clothes, same blood-stained hands. But the other Daniel's face. His eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light. The doppelganger smiled, a slow, unnatural curl of the lips. "No," Daniel whispered, "you're not me." The other Daniel tilted his head, speaking in his voice but layered with dozens of others. Men, women, children, all at once. "You left me down there, but I don't stay buried. I follow. I always follow." The lights flickered violently, plunging the hallway into stuttering darkness. Each flash revealed more figures, more versions of him, emerging from the shadows. Some limped with broken bones jutting from their skin, some clawed at their own faces, Some dragged chains as they shuffled closer. Panic surged through him. He bolted, sprinting down the corridor, his heartbeat hammering in his throat. Doors slammed open on their own as he passed, revealing patients staring silently, doctors with eyeless sockets, nurses whose mouths stretched impossibly wide in screams he couldn't hear. He burst into the main hall, gasping for air. The exit door loomed ahead, rusted, chained but real. Freedom. He sprinted, shoving the chains aside with trembling hands. They fell to the floor with a metallic crash. He threw the door open and stumbled outside. Cold night air hit his face. Stars glittered faintly above the asylum's black silhouette. He was outside, free. But as he collapsed to his knees, catching his breath, a voice echoed behind him. Low, guttural, resonating through the trees. "Do you really think walls contain me?" Daniel turned. The asylum's windows glowed with a sickly red light, and in each window, a shadow stood, hundreds of them, watching him. Every reflection, every fractured piece of himself, still staring. The ground beneath him shuddered. He looked down to see black veins spreading across the earth, crawling toward his feet like cracks in glass. They pulsed with the same crimson glow as the entity's chamber. Daniel's breath caught. He realized with a horror deeper than anything he had felt before. He hadn't escaped. He had carried it with him. Everywhere he would, Nino. Every reflections, every shadow in the corner of his eye. It would follow. The asylum wasn't just a building. It was a seed. And it was already inside him. Daniel staggered back from the spreading cracks in the earth, but they crawled faster than he could move, chasing his every step. The soil split open, and from beneath, black hands clawed upward, dozens of them, reaching for his ankles, his wrists, his throat. He screamed and tore himself free, running blindly into the forest. Branches whipped his face, roots snagged his feet, but he kept moving. The moon overhead shone pale and distant, yet even its light seemed tainted, flickering as though struggling to shine through something unseen. Finally, exhausted, he collapsed against a tree. His chest heaved, his vision blurred. For a moment, silence again. Only the rustle of leaves. He dared to hope he'd outrun it. Then he noticed the tree bark, where his hand rested. Symbols. The same spiraling marks carved into the walls of the asylum, glowing faintly red. He jerked his hand away in horror. All around him, every tree bore the same markings, burning softly in the night. A laugh echoed, not from the forest, from inside his own skull, low, guttural, vibrating through his bones. "You think there's an outside, Daniel? There's only me. There has always only been me." Daniel pressed his palms to his ears, screaming. But the voice only grew louder. Shadows twisted at the edges of his vision, arms stretching, mouths whispering, eyes blinking open in the bark of the trees. He stumbled forward, desperate for any escape. Then he saw it. A small cabin in the clearing ahead. Light flickered in the window, warm, inviting. A human place. Hope. He burst inside. The cabin was empty but intact. Dusty furniture, a fireplace still smoldering. He slammed the door behind him, bolting it shut. His shaking body sank into a chair. For the first time he felt safe. But the mirror above the fireplace caught his eye. At first it reflected him. Sweaty, blood-stained, terrified. Then slowly the reflection smiled. Not him. The reflection leaned closer, pressing against the glass from the inside, its lips moving without sound. Daniel froze, unable to look away. Then he heard it, not through his ears, but through the marrow of his bones. This is not a curse, Daniel. It is a merging. You are me, I am you, and soon there will be no difference. The reflection's hand pushed against the glass. The surface rippled, cracked, shattered outward. Daniel stumbled back as his own figure climbed out of the mirror, its body slick with black ooze, eyes hollow and endless. It stood, towering, smiling with his own mouth. "You're not real," Daniel whispered, voice breaking. The thing stepped closer, dripping shadows across the wooden floor. "On the contrary, I am the only part of you that ever was." The candles in the cabin snuffed out, plunging everything into darkness. Only the sound remained, his own ragged breathing, and another breath, perfectly in sync with his own, right behind him. The darkness pressed in, thicker than air, thicker than night. Daniel could no longer tell if his eyes were open or closed. The blackness was absolute, yet within it he felt movement, something breathing, something circling. He spun, heart racing, but there was no light, no shape, only whispers. They were his own voice, 100, 1,000 versions of himself murmuring in unison. Each whisper carried a fragment of thought, a memory, a secret he never wanted spoken. "Stop!" he begged, clutching his head. "Stop, please!" But the whispers grew louder. They rose into laughter, his laughter, echoing endlessly, until it fractured into screams. His screams. Then, in the void, 2 pale eyes opened. Not glowing, not shining, just empty and endless. They hung in the black like holes in reality itself. A figure stepped forward, his double, the one from the mirror. But now it was taller, broader, its limbs impossibly long. It moved without sound, without weight, as if the ground itself belonged to it. Daniel stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The floor dissolved beneath his feet and he fell, down, down, endlessly. Yet when he landed, he was standing again. The cabin was back. The forest was back. The asylum was back, all at once. Every place he had run through blurred together, overlapping like torn pages pressed into one book. Walls bled into trees. Floors melted into soil. Doors opened into sky. Daniel screamed, but his voice came out in 2 tones. His and the thing's, perfectly blended. He clawed at his skin, desperate to peel it away. But the darkness seeped through his veins like ink in water. His hands were no longer his. They stretched, twisted, too many fingers curling in impossible directions. The double's voice filled the fractured world. "There is no you without me. There never was." Daniel dropped to his knees, sobbing, the truth sinking in like poison. His memories, his fears, his identity. Everything was tangled in the shadow. He couldn't tell which thoughts were his own anymore. The world around him began to collapse. The trees screamed as they turned to stone. The asylum walls melted into blood, and the stars overhead blinked out one by one. All that remained was the shadow, and Daniel's voice, merging, twisting, until it was no longer a scream, no longer a plea, but laughter. The same laughter he had heard in the beginning. The laughter of something that had already won. Silence. The kind of silence that swallows thought, breath, even time itself. Daniel stood, or thought he stood, within it. There was no ground beneath him, no sky above, only a vast emptiness stretching forever. And yet he was not alone. The shadow loomed, no longer his double, no longer even a shape. It had become everything. The silence, the void, the endless black stretching beyond sight. He could feel it pressing into him, inside him, as if his body was just a fragile shell, holding back an ocean of darkness. He tried to speak, but the words didn't belong to him anymore. His lips moved, but the voice was wrong. Low, guttural, inhuman. Each sound rippled through the void like thunder. "You see now," the voice said, though he couldn't tell if it was him or the shadow. "You were never escaping. You were coming home." Daniel's chest heaved as the last fragments of himself tried to resist. Faces flashed before his eyes, memories of laughter, sunlight, the warmth of human life. But each memory flickered, burned, and was consumed by the black fire spreading inside him. His hands stretched again, longer, sharper. His eyes clouded until they were nothing but two pale voids. He screamed, but the sound twisted midair, warping into a deep, mocking laugh. The darkness folded around him like a cocoon. His body dissolved into it, piece by piece. First flesh, then bone, then thought itself, until all that was left was the echo of his fear, and then silence again. In the world outside, the cabin stood still and quiet. The forest breathed with the wind. The asylum's broken halls waited in the dark. But now, if you listened closely, if you dared to step too close, you could hear it. A laugh, low, endless, waiting. Daniel was gone. The shadow remained, and it was hungry.